I realized recently that there's always a character in TV shows whose job it is to really help us understand what's going on. Maybe they're new to the team or new to town. Maybe they're just a little bit slow, but they ask the questions that we want to ask as the audience and understand everything that's taking place. And I say this because I feel kind of bad for poor Peter. We know that he's the rock on which Jesus shall build his church, but quite often he just gets questions wrong. His role in the Gospels and all of the disciples in some ways is to help us understand what Jesus is really talking about. And they end up looking a little silly sometimes. Well, today in our passage, he gets it right at first before, then getting it wrong. Jesus asks, who do they say that I am? And the disciples answer the question. The people say that maybe you're John the Baptist back from the dead, or Elijah back from the dead, or a prophet back from the dead. There's a lot of that back from the dead stuff going on. And then Jesus asks, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter becomes the one to confess Jesus is the Messiah. It's his moment of glory, and it lasts about, 14 seconds. 2 minutes at the outside edge. Because, next question, well, I'll take, what does the Messiah do for 400, Alex? Because Jesus turns around and says, well, the Messiah is there to suffer. And Peter's not okay with that, so Peter takes him aside and rebukes him, and Jesus goes full nuclear on the guy and tells him to buzz off. It's not his finest moment. I think Peter's problem is that his expectations don't match up with reality. He's focused on what he thinks should be and not what is here in the now. He's got, to paraphrase what Jesus says, he's got his mind set on human expectations and not on God's divine understanding of reality. See, for Peter, messiahs, if they are anything, are winners. They're certainly not losers. The job of a messiah is victory. Victory over Rome. And yeah, you can mess around with this messiah idea a little bit around the edges. Jesus has come along and redrawn some borders, and there's some people maybe who were supposed to be enemies that are now insiders, and Peter's okay with that. And Jesus is talking a whole lot about all this nonviolent stuff, and sure, but I suspect that in some of his disciples' minds, they sort of think that, okay, we'll still kill a few Romans in order to get to the glorious nonviolent dream. If Jesus is the Messiah for Peter, he's got to do Messiah stuff. He's got to toss out Rome. He's got to reconnect Israel to her God. He's got to restore the glory of the promised land. He's got to rebuild this land. And he cannot suffer, because messiahs just don't do that. Some of this is a difference in definition, but some of it is a difference in an understanding of what actually the world is like versus what it should be. Peter has one idea of what the world should be like, and Jesus has an understanding of the world as it actually is. Sometimes Peter makes me think of like a toddler who says, is told, you have to put on shoes. And the kid says, well, I don't want my feet. I was like, well, tough break, kid. You've got feet. It's cold outside. You're going to have to put shoes on. Peter's stuck in this place where he's like, no, that's not how this is going to go, and I'm just going to reject everything. He's literally rebuking God incarnate as a result. Well, Jesus, on the other hand, deeply understands how human beings operate. He knows that when perfect love meets human imperfection, things are going to get ugly. He knows that perfect compassion will breed some chaos. He knows that God's justice will upset us. He knows that this new kingdom is breaking in And it's going to end up pitting people against each other. It's going to disrupt a status quo. It's going to create some tension and some anger and some chaos. And the way human beings react to all of these things is to get rid of it, usually by putting the blame onto somebody and getting rid of that person. So the person who brings compassion is not going to be celebrated. They're going to get killed. Jesus knows this. Peter doesn't want to accept it. What Jesus models for us in this moment is a deep embrace of the here and now, even if it doesn't meet with our expectations. I wish we could say we were all like Jesus in that moment, but quite often we're like Peter. We resist embracing the here and now because it hurts to admit its flaws. Say you're dating the wrong person and you sort of know it, but to admit it means breaking up, loss, loneliness, transition. Say you know that you're the one who said things you shouldn't have said in an argument with a loved one and it's produced a frayed relationship. You know you're the one who dropped the ball on that big project at work. You know you're the one who made a bunch of mistakes and got you where you were going. Maybe it's got nothing to do with you or blame, but it's just something you don't want to have to deal with. Like you planned a vacation and your boss said it was fine and then changed his mind. A friend just bailed on you when you had planned a night out that you really needed. One opportunity in all of these events in life is to just embrace them and say, well, okay, this stinks, but it's here. I just got to cope. But that's not what we usually do. Normally, our first instinct is to try and sort of deny the reality of it. And you may not think, okay, I'm never really denying reality, am I? But it shows up in little things that we say and how we act. So for instance, if you said, oh, I just can't handle this. It shouldn't be this way. There's an element of denial of reality in that. This is totally unfair. I hate this. Most sentences that start with should. I should be better looking. I should be further along in my career by now. Are a rejection of a deep sense that like reality is not okay, instead of figuring out where your starting point is. It's most familiar to us as a stage of grief, right? So think of the stages of grief most of us are familiar with. We have denial, but it's far more commonplace than that. And I think it's showing up in this dynamic between Peter and Jesus. Peter is literally arguing with the reality that Jesus is presenting to them. And to be clear, the problem here isn't having high expectations of what should be fair or dreams for your life. The problem is that all of this turns pain into suffering. I can tell you, if you're in an argument with reality, no matter how smart you are, you're not going to win. And so arguing and rebuking reality is just going to make you more upset. Quite often we turn to coping habits. We recognize that the pain from all of this lives in our body and we don't want to feel that pain, so we try to escape the body somehow. We binge watch TV, we eat bad food. We get lost in drugs or alcohol or online shopping or gambling or anything to distract our minds from something that we're experiencing. In some ways, this is like that old children's rhyme. You can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And, that hurts because Humpty Dumpty, swell guy, really good dude, bit of a weird name, but upstanding fellow. We all wish this hadn't happened, but we tried it. All the king's horses, all the king's men, they all got together. Not going to happen. So we have to embrace that fact and move forward. I actually think this is where a lot of prejudice comes from. a lot of the hatred we see in the world, because I deeply believe most people are good. But these good people see something awful happening. They see some suffering. And they know it's unfair. They know it's unjust. Maybe they even know that they're complicit or in some way responsible or blessed. And that feeling hurts. And they don't want to deal with that. So instead of embracing it, they latch on to something that exists in our culture, like racism or homophobia, misogyny. And they say, well, that's the reason that this person is to blame for the hurt, and I don't have to be touched. I can distance myself from reality by going down a rabbit hole of anger and hatred. What it comes down to is that it's way easier to point fingers than to confess something. That's literally what Peter's doing, and that's why Jesus calls him Satan. Seems like he's just really going over the top, but Satan in Hebrew is ha-satan, it's the accuser. So Peter is accusing Jesus because in Peter's mind, someone's got to be at fault. If it's not the Romans and it's the Messiah, then it messes up the whole system. So something's not going on here. He's pulling him aside and he's rebuking Jesus. He's saying, Jesus, you're wrong. And Jesus says, you're the accuser right now. Now, the alternative to all of this is to just deeply embrace the here and now, with all of its flaws, with all of its ugliness. And this is not resignation. That's not saying, oh, well, there's never going to be anything better. I'm stuck here. It's not affirmation. It's not saying, well, this spot is terrible, but I'm going to pretend that it's great. It's just admitting that this is a starting point. And if we're going to get from out of this valley to the top of that mountain, we're going to have to walk uphill a ways, and we better be ready for it. In one sense, that's actually what picking up your cross means in this context. We've loaded that term down with symbolic language, and it's very familiar to us, but so often we use it in incorrect ways. We talk about somebody who's stuck in a bad situation where their life is really awful, and we say, well, that's just their cross to bear. But Jesus isn't using symbolic language. He's talking to his disciples at a time when there were Jewish uprisings against Rome. Jewish uprisings against Rome usually produced revolutionaries who got themselves crucified. Jesus, in a sense, is saying, look around you. There's crosses on the hills. That's an ugly reality. It's not great. No one's excited about this. But it is what is. And you better start there. In one sense, pick up your cross is Jesus saying, become a person who embraces ugly, beautiful, contradictory here and now, no matter what it is. So this Lent, ask yourself, where am I saying it shouldn't be like this? Where are you avoiding a messy truth about your life? Where are you fighting a losing battle with something you don't want to admit? I think during quarantine, it's possible I have picked up a quarantine-y bit of a quarantummy. I'm not super fond of admitting this fact, but if I embrace it, then maybe it will help me avoid jelly beans and pie. Maybe I can see my path forward. Embracing what is scary, well, that's the significance of incarnation. We don't do this alone. Incarnation is God looking at a world that's kind of messed up and saying, yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm going to start there and change it. God didn't wait for us to become perfect and then say, okay, once everything fits a beautiful vision, then I'll walk alongside you. God looked at a world that is brutal and messy and ugly and also astonishing and beautiful and said, I want to be part of it. I want to be part of your lives in the midst of it. I will walk with you as you seek to transform it. I will embrace what is there and outline a breathtaking vision of what could be. And I'll do it all, even if it means getting hurt, even if it means death on a cross. Because that's what love looks like. And so as we do this, as we stay rooted and stay grounded and embrace even an ugly, messy here and now, we do it with Christ alongside us. There, helping us at our side to become better human beings, better parents, better siblings, better change makers, better servants to each other, to our neighbors. So as you go this week, ask yourself how you can stay grounded and what you need to embrace. But first, let's sing.